This is your Irish Diary, presenting the romance and reality of Irish life then and now. Áuric Éireann, or Irish Diary, is presented by the Patrick Butler Family Foundation of St. Paul. Professor John McKiernan of the College of St. Thomas in St. Paul is writer and narrator.
This sign is the sign of one of the greatest men Ireland has produced, the dove. The sign of a man whom we call Colmcille, whose name in Irish, Colmcille, means dove of the church. His Latin name is Columba, and many of you may have seen or visited a church called St. Columba's or gone to a school or something of that sort. Columba is the Latin form, Colmcille is the Irish form. And Colmcille was not only a saint. If he were only a saint, we might not now be talking about him. He was also a prince, a royal prince, and one of the greatest lines produced in any of the Irish dynasties. He was a man in whose blood flowed the famous and proud O'Neill heritage. He was a direct descendant of Niall of the Nine Hostages, one of the great kings of ancient Ireland. So we are talking now about a man whose fame almost eclipsed that of Patrick, although perhaps he's not so well known because he doesn't have a parade in America named after him. But in the Gaelic tradition, Colmcille is a great name and a grand name, and a name which links together in a very interesting way church and state. He was not only a hero then in the ecclesiastical sense, as indeed I suppose that's how we might define saints, but he was a hero also in the national sense, because he represented all that was best in bravery, learning, and piety. So that in the Gaelic tradition, Colmcille is actually perhaps the greatest name in Ireland. But we won't dispute that, because the Gaels themselves always associated three names: Patrick, Brigid, and Colmcille. And according to tradition, the three of these are buried together in the same grave in Downpatrick. That's probably not true, but it's a persistent tradition, and perhaps we'll never know whether it was true or not. Colmcille takes us back to the 6th century. He was born in 521 in Donegal, or Tirchonel, in the land of the Connells. He was born in 521 in Gartan, a beautiful section with a rather wild appeal, the lake and the mountain coming so close together. For us in America, perhaps, some of the lake area of New Hampshire might recall the grandeur and the appeal of Gartan, Donegal, where Colmcille was born. His fame, however, is associated greatly with Iona, and before the end of this program, I hope to be able to show you some motion picture scenes of a very interesting pilgrimage to Iona. This island, which the famous Dr. Johnson of the 18th century described in these words, "A soil made sacred by wisdom, valor, and virtue." And it was a soil made sacred by Colmcille. Well then, how do we go from Donegal to Iona? How do we go from Ireland to Scotland? Well, we go there in the person of this great man, Colmcille. Interestingly, as Patrick is the patron of Ireland, Colmcille is the patron of Scotland. And how do we make the connection? It was because Colmcille took the Christian faith to Scotland, Christianized it, and indeed he and his monks Christianized most of northern England, so that his name is forevermore associated with Ireland's neighboring Ireland, Great Britain. Now, back to Colmcille himself as a person. Colmcille had a fiery temper. Perhaps that was the aristocratic, perhaps that was the haughty royal lineage of the O'Neills, whatever it was. Colmcille had it. Colmcille had the advantage also of a poetic education under the famous, indeed very famous, early Irish poetic societies, is perhaps the only way we can describe it in English, of the times of the 6th century. So we must band together when we talk of this very complex character, a poetic heritage, a royal lineage, and a fervent Christianity. Put all of these things together, and we have a very complex man. A man who has come down to us in literature, in politics, and in church history. Now, the interesting aspect of all of this, I suppose, is that poetically he represents, as perhaps no other single figure in Irish tradition, the great loneliness that the Irish exile fears and experiences when he leaves his native land. I'd like to show you some of the scenes of that native land, scenes that were familiar to Colmcille, so as to help you understand some of that wakeness, as it's called in Irish, some of that soul-shattering loneliness which an Irishman can feel when he's parted from the country of his ancestors. This man, Colmcille, tore himself away from scenes like this. These scenes are all in Northern Ireland, in the Lough Erne district, and represent land that he and his fellows trod frequently. These are sightseers going over that land today, as indeed perhaps some of you have, and along the coastal road in Antrim. Today, an easy journey because of the automobile, but then much more rugged in its scenery, much more difficult to traverse. This is the beauty, the sheer appeal of a magnificent country dedicated to the saints of old, to the sightseers of today. Here is a scene in the mountains of Mourne, still in the northern part of Ireland, which is so intimately associated with Colmcille. The mountains of Mourne, some of you may know, because of the famous song by Percy French. At any rate, here today on a mountain that was once consecrated to saints, tourists take the easy way up on the horse. And here are some of the churches, not dating in this instance from the 6th century, but much later into the late Middle Ages. But all of this area that you see here was closely associated with Colmcille and his fellow monks. And here in Downpatrick, the statue of St. Patrick looks over all of these lands, which, as I told you earlier, are consecrated in tradition now to the three great heroes of the Gael, Patrick, Colmcille, and Brigid. And here the fishing vessels of Northern Ireland in the Carlingford Lough. Capture for us, too, some of the everyday, picturesque, and romantic quality of the scenery today. And here are your mountains of Mourne from another view, with the quiet waters that mirror the sky. And here, the thatched houses that one can still occasionally see, although almost all of these have been replaced by slated roofs. Indeed, if you're lucky to have a thatched house these days, they're getting to be quite a scarce item. And here is the famous Derrymore House, with its lovely thatching kept alive even today, a famous 18th century home. Here in Antrim in Northern Ireland is the well-preserved Round Tower of Antrim, the place to which in the 10th and 11th centuries the Irish monks resorted for safety when the Viking raids traveled over the countryside. And these quiet waters in Tyrone, County Tyrone, where men now enjoy a respite from a busy day, and ply their trade of Isaac Walton. These quiet waters, the sands, the coastal lines, the meadows, the fields, the mountains, and even the children by the roadside. Colmcille knew all these, and they built a great net for his heart. His heart was caught, enmeshed in the same net that catches the heart of every Irishman and has made his songs so poignant, so feeling, so that an Irishman is in exile is perhaps a well-known symbol of an unending pain and sorrow. Well, I had to remark upon these and show you some of these scenes, and shown to you incidentally through the courtesy of the Northern Ireland Tourist Board. Had to show you some of these scenes so that you might for yourselves understand the attraction that this part of the country had for Colmcille. Because when Colmcille left the country in a self-imposed exile, when he left the country, he wrote poetry that reflected, at least tradition ascribes it to him. He wrote poetry that reflected this bitter sense of exile, although he went voluntarily for the sake of Christ to win souls. That's another story, perhaps, because he was responsible for a dreadful battle in which 3,000 souls were lost. And it was because of that battle that he took upon himself the penance of going abroad to win as many souls to Christ as he had lost through that battle. Well, when he left, tradition ascribes to him these songs which sing the sorrow of the exiled Gael. And the strange thing is, when he was in Iona and when he was in Scotland, he was really amongst his own people who spoke his own language, because at that time the Irish had a fairly extensive colony in Scotland, and indeed the word Scot until about the 11th century meant Irishman. So even the name Scotland, which comes from the Latin word Scotus and was applied to Ireland, even the name tells us that he was amongst his own people. But it wasn't his own countryside. And the Irish have a tremendous sense of place. We might note that even in 20th century Irish literature, when Joyce writes an entire novel of over 500 pages, Ulysses, devoted to Dublin, one place, and even one day in that place. But when he was roaming amongst these people, he wrote a poem in which he says, Damalyam illa, damalyam alba illa. If I had all of Scotland, I'd exchange it for the meanest, smallest place in my native Derry. Well, now let us go to Derry then, the city in Northern Ireland, which is and will be forever associated with his name. And I would like to bring to you, again through the courtesy of the Northern Ireland Tourist Board, these scenes of one of the most unique pilgrimages in the 20th century. This is the year 1963, 1400 years after Colmcille's departure from Derry for Iona. Here, 1400 years later, 13 young men from the 4 provinces of Ireland are conducting a commemoration of Colmcille's departure for Iona in a handcrafted boat and in handmade woolen tunics similar to what were worn in that time, with hand-tooled oars, with everything a replica, in other words, of the 6th century. These men are going to row this cowhide boat from the city of Derry on Lough Foyle, from the city of Derry to the island of Iona, out into the fierce North Atlantic, which batters the Irish and Scottish coasts. Here, with the city of Derry in the background, Going up Loch Foyle, they start their journey. And why? Well, in our time, we've had some remarkable voyages, Kon-Tiki and others that you can think of. But this surely deserves to be listed amongst all of those. A rather unique venture, duplicating what this older painting shows us, the departure of Colmcille. And here the map will help you see the journey from Derry up Loch Foyle out toward Rathlin Island. 3 days into the rain and into the wind, sleeping at night on the shore under their overturned craft, just indeed as Colmcille did in his time. Finally, on the 3rd day, arriving at Iona, which is that island you'll see at the top of your screen. Here, journeying between the islands in order to save themselves a bit of the buffeting of the sea, and gradually sighting the land, while at the same time observing the same pilgrimage in much greater comfort and in 20th century style. We have here a boat full of pilgrims, at least 900 on board, departing from Belfast and hoping to arrive in time on the island of Iona to see the arrival of the small, hand-powered craft. Now, what was the occasion of this? Well, actually, this was a commemoration observed by the Church of Ireland. You know of the Church of England? Well, this is the Church of Ireland. And they look upon Columba, or Colmcille, as their patron saint. They look upon him as the father of the Church of Ireland. And in that sense, the Church of Ireland is quite proud that it is an older establishment by almost 1,000 years than the Church of England. So that if you know a member of the Church of Ireland and you say to him, "Oh, you're a branch of the Church of England," be careful. He may point out, no, we're 1,000 years older. On the other hand, the Roman Catholic Church feels that Colmcille is their saint, and that the Church of Colmcille was the Church of Rome. So much then for our religious history. At least here now is the arrival on Iona and the commemoration of this great man and of the great feat of these young men of 1963. Did you see the bird? That was a carrier pigeon taking the news back to Ireland that the pilgrims had arrived. So these young men actually duplicated the dangerous journey of Colmcille and his monks of 1,400 years previous. And now they are on their way to the restored abbey, which is a Church of Ireland abbey, the restored abbey on the island of Iona. This island, I need not remind you, is perhaps one of the, or should be, perhaps one of the centers of historic Christian experience, because it was from this island that Colmcille and his monks Christianized Scotland, Northumbria, went even down as far as the Thames, and this long before Augustine landed in Kent. Furthermore, it was monks from this particular establishment who were chosen to establish the monastery at Lindisfarne. And many of you know of the fame of Lindisfarne and its scriptoria, the Gospels that were produced there, the learned monks who from there taught many of the royal families of Anglo-Saxon England. So you see, it is from this island, the abbey of which you see in front of you, that a great part of Scotland and England were Christianized. This is the fame of Iona, and it is the work, perhaps I shouldn't say of one man, but it is the work of a man of a great man, Colmcille. This is the ecclesiastical side of his history. There are other sides to it too. He was, as I remarked to you before, a man of somewhat violent temper. And if we have time, I'd like to tell you a story of that temper, because it was on account of the temper that Iona came and the Christianization of these neighboring communities, of these communities that are neighboring to Ireland, that is Scotland and Northern England. And such is the mysterious way in which some people would say fate, and others would say perhaps the grace of God operates. Well, now we are back here in Derry, observing the renaming of a craft in honor of this occasion, this boat, which will be used for humane purposes, rescue purposes, and so on, and is thus fittingly associated, you see, with a religious person. This boat is now named in honor of this occasion, this pilgrimage, and it is associated with the city, Derry, which has and always will be, as I said, associated with Colmcille. And out into the open seas, it takes its way to join the other pilgrims at this church. Now, I remark that the fame of this monastery spread far and wide. And indeed, in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and up to the 12th century, Irish monks were a common sight in many, many places of Europe. And it was the vigor of men like Colmcille that left behind them a tradition that is and was one of the most fertile in the history of Western Christianity. These men, and Colmcille was a remarkable exemplar, these men traversed great distances on foot, as well as, of course, on horse, but often on foot, covering thousands of miles, and carrying with them not only the gospel, but the learning of classical Greece and Rome. Here is a stained glass window in honor of one of the greatest of them, Colmcille. And here are children playing on the scenes, the very area that's so intimately associated with him. And we'll show you a map eventually of the foundations in England and on the continent that owe their origins to this man, Colmcille. All of these places, whose names you see before you, in France, Germany, Italy, and other places, are the direct consequence of Colmcille and the men of his kind. Great heroes they were. Well then, a brief word about another side of Colmcille. Did you know that he was associated, for instance, with what may be the first copyright test case in Western history? I'm not sure that it's actually the first, but at least it's certainly one of the earliest, because it carries us back to the 6th century. Colmcille was visiting a friend of his in Movilla, in the Abbey of Movilla, St. Finian. And while Colmcille was there, he secretly copied, or made a copy, of Finian's Bible, at least of a New Testament portion of it. We think, although no one can be sure, we think this may have been the first St. Jerome, Vulgate edition of the Bible to have arrived in Ireland. That's beside the point. He made a copy. So great was his love, his devotion for the Gospels, that seeing this book, and presumably newly in Ireland, he made his own copy. Now that doesn't strike you and me as very important or very significant, but we must remember we're talking about the 6th century. Books were hand-copied affairs. They were precious. Each one copied on vellum laboriously. Colm did this, or Colmcille, his fuller name, did this without Finian's permission. And when Finian discovered it, he was a bit annoyed. And eventually the case the dispute came to be laid before the High King, King Diarmuid, at Tara. And the king decided against Colmcille. He decided in a very poetic decision, at least a decision expressed in poetic terms. Remember now that the copies of the books were on vellum, and we see the poetry of the metaphor used. The king's decision was this, that first copyright decision: to every cow, its calf. Colmcille, of course, was in no mood to accept such a decision. But the situation might have blown over had not at the same time something else occurred. A relative of Colmcille's had sought sanctuary in the church, and that sanctuary was violated. Colmcille's relative was taken by the king's soldiers and killed, and thus Colmcille had two grudges against the king. Now, Colmcille, the dove of the church, was a man, remember, of fiery temper, not completely subordinated. And now he called out his own royal kinsmen, his own soldiers, and a great battle was fought against the king, a battle that took place in Sligo, Kildrumna, in the year 561. 3,000 men were slain at that battle, and Colmcille could not quite forgive himself for the rest of his life. But this was the immediate cause, this copyright case and its consequences were the immediate cause of Colmcille's self-imposed exile to the island of Iona, because he determined to go abroad and seek to save for Christ as many souls as he had lost because of that battle. Now there's one other very important and interesting tale, and a true one, to be told about Colmcille. He returned one time for a convention in Drumcat. He returned to argue the case for the poets of Ireland. The poets of Ireland had enjoyed advantages that they enjoyed in perhaps no other country in Western Europe at this time. But their demands became quite excessive upon the economy. They were actually able to make demands. Can you imagine such an economy when poets could make demands? Not in our day. But at any rate, the kings and other people were quite fed up with them. And Colmcille made an arrangement at that time which preserved their rights as long as the Gaelic order lasted in Ireland. In other words, until the 17th century. This then is the man, Colmcille, Prince of the Gael, whose story is told here in verse, whose name is given almost to the country. This man was Ireland. Colmcille, Prince of the Gael, great man of God and of country. Patrick, Breed, and Colmcille, the three great names of the Irish race.
If you would like a list of selected readings to add to your enjoyment, please send a self-addressed stamped envelope to Professor John McKiernan, College of St. Thomas, St. Paul, Minnesota. This program has been presented as a public service by the Patrick Butler Family Foundation and produced at KTCA TV, Minneapolis, St. Paul.